Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Monday, June the 1st, 2020. On this episode, a conversation with Bakari Sellers. Bakari is the author of a brand new book entitled My Vanishing Country. The book is available now wherever you get your books. Bakari is also an attorney and a CNN political analyst. And I'll be conversing with him about his book, about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and politics. Next. This is Omar Moore here for The Politicrat, and I am with today Bakari Sellers. He is an attorney. He is an analyst for CNN, political analyst. He has just written a book that's just been released called My Vanishing Country, a memoir. It's available where all great books are found. And thank you very much for coming on on this day, Bakari. Thank you.
No, thank you for having me and giving me a platform to talk about my vanishing country. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And let's get straight to it because your book has come in the last couple of weeks. One of the things that you talk about so fondly is about your father and how much he's meant to you, how much he shaped you, and the kinds of things he's went through that's really defined who you are in terms of the politics, you growing up in South Carolina. Can you talk a little bit about your father and about your growing up in a political activist household and in those times? You talk about the 1960s and how that kind of shaped you even before you were born.
Yeah, my father molded me, and my mother as well, that we were children of the civil rights movement. And so my family, we still believe in words like hope and love and truth and justice and peace. We still believe that we have to become a part of something larger than ourselves. The biggest problem that I had, though, when I look through the lens and the context of being a child of the movement, is that we've made progress, but we still have so far to go in this country. My father was shot by law enforcement February 8th of 1968, and he was in prison. All the officers who fired shots were found not guilty. My father was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. He got involved because of Emmett Till. He felt the heartache and pain over Medgar Evers and Jimmy Lee Jackson. Just as now we have not just Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, but we also have the 9 who were killed in the Charleston massacre, etc. So I talk about all of that in My Vanishing Country and the pain and trauma it is to be black in this country.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm also fascinated about, you also talk about why are all the strong women or the strongest women dying. That's one of the chapters in the book. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? I mean, I obviously want everybody to read the book, but could you just glimpse into that for us, please?
Yeah, I talk about the women who are like the old women who sit at the front 2 rows of the church and wear the big hats. And when you hug them, you smell like Chanel number 8 or day long. Like they just 2 sticks of butter in their sweet potato pies. But they hug, give you life, and they tell you when you're wrong. And they're the backbone of not only your community, but of the Democratic Party as a whole. And I wanted to give them voice. I wanted to give them life. But I also talked about the struggles of black women and basically saying that for far too long, we've just said thank you, but we've never really and truly empowered them in this country and given them their just reward. And I gave the story of my wife who almost died in childbirth, and the issues of African-American female mortality and how important they are. And so I just wanted, this book is a love letter to the South. It's a love letter to my mother and father. It's a love letter to black women. But it also challenges institutions like the church, like our civil rights organizations, like our media in our country, to do better so we can be a more perfect union.
Absolutely. Now, again, the book can be found pretty much everywhere. I mean, all the places you can get your books. I know that your time is precious, so I wanted to ask you about another couple of things. one of the things I want to just ask you about the book before I ask you about some of the other topics that you might be expected to be asked about in these times with politics and whatever, this climate that we're in. With the book itself, what was the genesis of the book for you? Because it's just come out. What sparked you to write the book in general?
Well, first of all, you never want or think your book's going to come out during a pandemic, right? So it's tough, to say the least. You're not able to move around the country and sell as much as you want to, or much as you would. That's kind of first. But the second thing is, this book is evergreen because it talks to issues of systemic injustice and systemic racism that are plaguing us today, that we see killing us with COVID, and we see in the streets after the death of George Floyd. And so it's timely. I guess that's fate. I guess that's fortuitous, but I'm torn because I wish George was still alive. I wish Ahmaud was still alive. I wish Breonna was still alive. I wish, the 25, 30,000 people, black folk who died from COVID, and all 102 were still alive because it was preventable. But here we are still talking about the injustices, and that's why I think My Vanishing Country is an important read for everyone. I think when black folk read it, they'll get a sense of understanding. A sense of pride, and when white folk read it, I hope they get a sense of understanding.
Very important indeed. Now, of course, we are, Bakari, as you know, exactly a week ago today, George Floyd was murdered, lynched, and that's the word I would use, by 4 police officers. And I want to know if you could just spend a few moments, and you've already amplified it and talked about it a little bit, but if you wanted to say a few more things about George Floyd and about this movement for justice.
Well, this movement for justice, that George Floyd was the spark. He was the tipping point, the breaking. He was the straw, right, that broke the camel's back. All those officers need to be arrested, full stop. But I want people to know that these protests are not just about George Floyd. They're about so many. They're about so many voices. And that's important to know. It's about the systemic injustice and racism in the over 400 years of such that we faced in our country.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is some of the coverage that I have seen. Now, of course, we have the black press who has been covering this, I think, very assiduously and very well. Forgive me for asking, and it's not, this is beyond your control. But the network that you appear on, just on a half-hour stretch in one of the programs yesterday, the word riot, violence, or looting was used. My goodness, at least 50 times I counted. I guess the point that I'm trying to ask you about, there's a lot of law enforcement types being interviewed, but not any activists being put on, not any anti-racist educators being put on. No conversations about the history of Minneapolis policing or anything like that, or even why, no conversations about the systemic oppression and about why someone might loot, about why poor people might do that. There's completely an absence of talking about systemic structures during this coverage. Could you talk, please, about what your impressions of the media coverage has been in the generalized mainstream news media regarding the issues that are affecting us as black people in this country, and about the systemics and the infrastructure that is not being talked about?
Well, I think we can always do better, and I always tell people to challenge, and I encourage the black media and black press to continue to go out and tell our stories, of course. But to flesh it out even that much more, one of the things that we have to take into account is that you're covering breaking news as it happens. And so the images that we see many times, you don't even have a talking head or a reporter. But even with the criticism that you gave of CNN, we do have to recall that they give me a platform and they allowed me to have a voice. Just today, it was myself and Wes Moore, who's the CEO of Robinhood, who himself is an activist, who have been able to tell our perspective from raising black children. And can we do better? The answer to that is yes. But my job is to tell my truth, and I will continue to do so.
Absolutely. one of the things I also wanted to ask you about is the political aspects, because we have someone who obviously is politicizing this to no end every chance he gets. I guess the question I would like to ask you, Bakari, is about how do you see what has been happening the last few months? Because, of course, as you mentioned, we had Ahmaud Arbery, we've had Breonna Taylor, we've had Sean Reed, the police killing of him has not been really covered. And of course, we have now George Floyd. My question for you, Bakari, is how much do you think these events may shape or affect the vice presidential selection now? Because
I think that, my hope is that it's a black female that he chooses. I think that makes it clearer that we have to do that. We have to have somebody who can harness this white hot energy we have on the streets. And so if we want to mobilize the voters who stayed home in 2016, those voters who chose the couch, then we must, it's our job. It's our job to make sure that we have somebody who can activate that base, and I hope that he chooses a black woman to do that. Absolutely.
Because one of the people that you've worked closely with, of course, he would probably say that you're a protege of his, is of course Jim Clyburn, the congressman in South Carolina, in your home state. He had been on over the weekend saying that despite Amy Klobuchar's great credentials, he really thinks that she couldn't be the nominee or the VP pick given Minneapolis. Do you want to talk about that at all? Any thoughts that you might have about this, or because of the situation there?
I think that unrest, I think it's ironic to me that a lot of activists, etc., they train their fire on a progressive prosecutor, Kamala Harris, during the primary, but they kind of left Amy Klobuchar to her own devices. And I think Jim's correct in his analysis that it's going to be really hard to select the senator from Minnesota, who was a prosecutor at that time, as vice president, when we have these issues of race that are before us today.
Absolutely. One last thing for you. What do you see going forward here? Obviously, there is a movement right now, and then you've heard the quote about moments and movements, and what we must do to harness this to make sure it's not only about George Floyd, but about really a system of policing that is not hostile and occupational, but one that is more people-oriented, community-oriented, and a system that bends towards that, where we have in Europe situations where the police were much more of a neighborhood force. But of course, here, policing came out of the slave patrols and the enslavement patrols, and that kind of force and containment policing is what we see throughout this country. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see us going forward? Where do you see us ultimately being here with this
I don't
movement?
really consider that question. That's a good question. It's a question of whether or not our leaders will rise to this occasion and meet the moment. I do think that people who are telling us to leave the streets and simply wait till November to go vote are giving out the wrong message. There has to be tangible solutions to our issues of policing. We have to have tangible solutions to help black folk with their daily plight and daily load. Right now you have coronavirus, you have riots in the streets. 100,000, 102,000 people have died. There are riots in every major city. And now is the time for leadership. And so I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm going to fight to make sure that we have justice in this country, and that justice is a verb, not just a noun.
Bakari Sellers, I know your time is short, so I want to say thank you so very much for your time today, sir. I wish you all the very best. Bakari Sellers, with his book, it's called My Vanishing Country, a memoir. He is also on Twitter at BAKARI_S as in Sam ELLERS. Bakari Sellers, thank you so very much for your time, sir.
Thank you. Have a blessed day.
You too. Bye-bye. Bakari Sellers has a new book. It's available now. It's called My Vanishing Country, a memoir. And it's available wherever you get great books. Bakari can be found once again on Twitter at BAKARI_S as in Sam ELLERS. Bakari Sellers, attorney, author, CNN political analyst, and at one point also a member of the South Carolina legislative body as a Democratic politician from 2006 to 2014. He was also the youngest ever, and is the youngest ever, elected African American politician in the entire country. I want to thank him once again for being on this edition of The Politicrat. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.